Have you ever been judged so harshly by strangers that it felt like your entire existence was being erased right in front of you? Have you ever stood there, frozen, while people looked at your worn-out shoes, your faded jacket, your tired eyes, and decided in that single moment that they knew exactly who you were and what you were worth? Well, let me tell you what happened to me on a cold Tuesday afternoon that changed everything I thought I knew about dignity, poverty, and the cruel assumptions people make when they think nobody is watching. My name doesn't matter for this story, but what does matter is that I want you to understand something that most people never truly grasp until it happens to them. Poverty isn't just about empty pockets or threadbare clothes. It's about the invisible weight you carry every single day, the shame that wraps around your shoulders like a suffocating blanket, the constant fear that someone will see through the carefully constructed facade you've built just to survive in a world that values appearance over substance. I was 23 years old when this happened, standing in the middle of an upscale shopping district where I had absolutely no business being. At least that's what the sales associate's eyes told me the moment I walked through those gleaming glass doors. I had saved for 3 months to buy my little sister a birthday present. 3 months of skipping meals, of walking instead of taking the bus, of saying no to every small pleasure that normal people take for granted. And I had exactly $73.42 in my pocket, money that felt like a fortune to me but would barely cover a discounted item in this place where the air itself seemed expensive. But before I tell you about what happened in that store, before I share the moment that broke me and then rebuilt me into someone I never imagined I could become, I need you to understand where I came from. Because poverty isn't just a state of being. It's a story written in hunger pangs at midnight, in the embarrassment of wearing the same jeans 4 days in a row, in the crushing anxiety of choosing between electricity and groceries, between medicine and rent, between dignity and survival. I grew up in a neighborhood where dreams went to die, where the sound of gunshots was as common as birds chirping in the suburbs, where my mother worked 16-hour days at a laundromat and still couldn't afford to keep the heat on during winter, where I learned to sleep in 3 layers of clothes and tell myself that the cold was character building. My father left when I was 7, just walked out one morning to buy cigarettes and never came back, leaving behind a mountain of debt and a family that would spend the next 15 years trying to climb out from under the weight of his absence. I remember being 11 years old and pretending to have already eaten lunch at school so my younger sister and brother could have bigger portions at dinner. I remember the hollow ache in my stomach becoming so familiar that I started to think of it as a companion, a reminder that I was still alive, still fighting, still here despite everything trying to erase us from existence. Teachers would look at me with that mixture of pity and disgust that poor kids learn to recognize early. That look that says, "We know you probably won't amount to anything, but we're obligated to try anyway." And I would sit in class wearing shoes held together with duct tape, carrying my books in a garbage bag because we couldn't afford a backpack, feeling the eyes of my classmates burning into me like hot coals, branding me with the scarlet letter of poverty that I couldn't wash off no matter how hard I scrubbed. But here's what nobody tells you about being poor. Here's the secret that those who've never experienced it can never truly understand. You become invisible and hypervisible at the same time. Invisible when you need help, when you're raising your hand with a question, when you're trying to participate in a world that wasn't designed for people like you, but hypervisible when someone wants to make an example, when security guards follow you through stores, when teachers assume you're the one who stole something, when every mistake you make is attributed to your circumstances rather than your humanity. I learned to make myself small, to take up as little space as possible, to apologize for existing in rooms where my presence made other people uncomfortable, and I became an expert at reading social cues, at knowing exactly when to laugh, when to be quiet, when to disappear completely so that the comfortable people around me could forget that poverty existed just outside their carefully manicured bubbles. My mother used to tell me that education was the only way out, that if I worked hard enough, studied long enough, sacrificed everything I had, I could escape this life and build something better. And I believed her with the desperate faith of someone drowning who's just been thrown a rope. So I studied, God, how I studied. I would stay up until 3 in the morning reading by the light of my phone because we'd had the electricity cut off again. I would do homework in public libraries because they had heating, and I could pretend I was there by choice rather than necessity. I would memorize textbooks because I couldn't afford to bring them home and risk losing them. And somehow, miraculously, impossibly, I earned a scholarship to a community college, a partial scholarship that covered tuition, but nothing else. Not books, not supplies, not transportation, not the invisible costs that pile up like snow in a blizzard until you're buried under them. I was 19 when I started college, And I quickly realized that this new world had its own language, its own rules, its own assumptions about who belonged and who didn't. And once again, I found myself trying to decode a system that seemed designed to exclude people like me. My classmates would complain about their parents buying them the wrong color laptop or not giving them enough allowance for spring break. And I would sit there wondering if I should ask to borrow notes because I couldn't afford to print the reading materials, wondering if anyone would notice that I wore the same rotation of 3 outfits every week, wondering if the gnawing hunger in my stomach was audible to the person sitting next to me who was casually eating a $15 salad they would probably throw half of away. I got a job at a gas station working overnight shifts from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and then I would go straight to my 8 a.m. class, existing in a fog of exhaustion so thick that sometimes I would forget where I was, what day it was, whether I had already eaten or just dreamed about eating. I got a second job cleaning offices on weekends, scrubbing toilets and emptying trash cans in the same buildings where I attended classes during the week, and the irony wasn't lost on me that I was literally cleaning up after people who would never even see me, who would walk past me in the hallways during the week without a flicker of recognition, because poor people, working people, people like me, were part of the scenery, not part of the story. Then I got a third job, babysitting for a professor's family, because 1 job wasn't enough, 2 jobs weren't enough, 3 jobs barely covered rent and ramen noodles and the constant fear that one unexpected expense would topple the entire precarious tower I had built. I was working 70 hours a week on top of being a full-time student, sleeping maybe 4 hours a night, running on coffee and determination and the kind of desperate hope that comes from having absolutely no other options, and people would ask me why I looked so tired, why I seemed distracted, why I couldn't just relax and enjoy the college experience like everyone else. And I would smile and make some joke about being a night owl, because explaining the truth felt like peeling off my skin and showing them the raw, bleeding reality underneath. And I knew they didn't really want to see that. They wanted the sanitized version of poverty that comes in heartwarming movies, not the ugly, grinding, soul-crushing reality that follows you home and sits on your chest while you try to sleep. My little sister was 14 by then, still living at home with our mother, still dealing with the same struggles I had grown up with, and I had promised myself that I would get her something special for her 15th birthday, something that showed her that there was a world beyond our neighborhood, beyond the limitations that everyone else had accepted as inevitable, something that said you are worth more than what the price tags say you are. So I started saving, putting aside $5 here, $10 there, money that I desperately needed for food or bus fare, or the 1,000 other small necessities that add up to a life. But I was determined. I was focused. I was going to buy my sister something from a real store, not a thrift shop or a dollar store, but a place where the items came in nice boxes with ribbons and tissue paper, and all the little luxuries that make a gift feel like it actually matters. 3 months later, I had $73.42, and I knew exactly what I wanted to get her: a beautiful journal with a leather cover that I had seen in the window of an upscale department store, the kind of journal that said, "Your thoughts matter, your dreams matter, you matter." And it was on sale for $68, which meant I would even have a little left over for wrapping paper and maybe a card. I put on my best clothes, which is to say my least worn-out clothes, a pair of jeans that only had one small hole near the pocket, a sweater that I had gotten from a donation bin but was in decent condition, and shoes that I had bought at a thrift store 2 years ago and had resoled myself using YouTube tutorials and sheer determination, and I took 3 buses to get to the shopping district where the department store was located, a part of the city I rarely visited because everything there reminded me of how far I still had to climb, how much I still lacked, how different my life was from the people who shopped there without checking price tags or calculating whether they could afford to eat that week. I walked into the store with my head up, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel, trying to belong in a space that clearly wasn't designed for people like me, and immediately I felt the shift in atmosphere. The way the sales associates' eyes tracked my movement through the aisles like I was a potential threat rather than a potential customer. The way they seemed to appear out of nowhere whenever I touched something, hovering just close enough to make me feel watched, judged, condemned, before I had even done anything wrong. I found the journal section, and there it was, even more beautiful than I remembered, with cream-colored pages and a ribbon bookmark and an embossed design on the cover that looked like something out of a fairy tale, and I picked it up carefully, reverently, already imagining my sister's face when she opened it, already composing the message I would write on the first page about dreams and possibilities and never letting anyone make you feel small. That's when I heard the voice behind me, sharp and cold as a blade. "Excuse me, Are you planning to purchase that or just handling merchandise? I turned around to find a sales associate, a woman probably in her mid-40s with perfectly styled hair and makeup that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, looking at me with undisguised suspicion, her eyes traveling from my worn shoes up to my faded sweater, taking inventory of every sign of my poverty like she was cataloging evidence. For a crime I hadn't yet committed. I felt my face flush hot with shame and anger, that familiar cocktail of emotions that poor people learn to swallow down because showing it only makes things worse. And I managed to say, "Yes, I'm planning to buy it. It's for my sister's birthday." And I hated how my voice sounded. Small and defensive, like I was apologizing for existing in this space, for daring to want something nice, for having the audacity to be poor and still believe I deserved to give my sister a proper gift. The sales associate's expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened, her lips pressing into a thin line as she said, "This item is quite expensive. Are you sure you can afford it? We've had issues with shoplifting lately, and I need to make sure all our customers are serious buyers." And the implication hung in the air between us like smoke, acrid and suffocating. The unspoken accusation that someone who looked like me, dressed like me, clearly poor and out of place, must be planning to steal rather than buy. Something inside me cracked in that moment. Not the dramatic shattering you see in movies, but a quiet, terrible breaking, like ice forming in my chest, spreading through my veins, freezing the part of me that still believed the world could be fair, that hard work mattered, that I could somehow transcend the circumstances I was born into through sheer force of will. And I realized with crushing clarity that no matter how hard I worked, no matter how many jobs I held, no matter how many sacrifices I made, there would always be people who looked at me and saw nothing but my poverty, nothing but my worn-out clothes and tired eyes, nothing but their own prejudices reflected back at them. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab this woman by her perfectly pressed collar and make her understand what it felt like to skip meals so your siblings could eat, to work until your hands bled and your back ached, and you couldn't remember the last time you slept through the night without nightmares about eviction notices and empty cupboards, to save every single penny for 3 months just to buy one nice thing for someone you love. I wanted to make her see me as a human being rather than a problem to be solved or a threat to be neutralized, but instead I just stood there, holding that journal like it was made of glass, feeling the weight of every assumption she had made about me pressing down on my shoulders like a physical burden. Then something shifted inside me, something hard and bright and furious, and I made a decision that would change everything. I looked this woman straight in her cold eyes and I said, "You want to know if I can afford this? You want to make sure I'm a serious buyer? Let me show you exactly what poverty looks like. Let me give you a real education about what it means to struggle and fight and survive in a world that treats people like me as disposable." And I could see the shock register on her face, the slight step backward, the uncertainty flickering across her features because poor people aren't supposed to talk back, aren't supposed to demand respect, aren't supposed to claim space in places like this. I pulled out my phone and I started talking, not to her but to the camera, documenting everything, the way she had approached me, the assumptions she had made, the accusation disguised as concern, and I said, "My name is unimportant, but my story matters. I am a full-time college student working 3 jobs. I sleep 4 hours a night. I saved for 3 months to buy my little sister a birthday present. And I was just accused of planning to shoplift because I don't look like I belong in this store." And I could see other customers starting to notice, starting to pull out their own phones, starting to pay attention to this scene unfolding in the middle of their comfortable shopping experience. The sales associate's face went pale, then red, and she started stammering. "I didn't accuse you of anything. I was just doing my job. We have protocols." But I wasn't finished. I was just getting started, because 3 months of saving, 19 years of poverty, a lifetime of being made to feel less than, it all came pouring out in a torrent of words that I couldn't have stopped if I wanted to. I told them about growing up in a house where we rationed toilet paper and reused tea bags and considered ketchup packets from fast food restaurants a valuable resource. I told them about my mother's hands, cracked and bleeding from chemicals in the laundromat, still going to work because missing a shift meant we didn't eat that week. I told them about sleeping in my clothes during winter because we couldn't afford heat, about doing homework by candlelight during power outages, about the crushing shame of using food stamps while people in line behind me sighed with impatience and made comments about welfare queens and lazy poor people who just needed to get a job. I told them about my first day of college, how I had felt like an imposter surrounded by people who had been preparing for this their entire lives, while I was just trying to figure out how to navigate a world I didn't understand. I told them about working the overnight shift at a gas station and having drunk customers call me stupid for working there, asking me what I did wrong in my life to end up in such a terrible job, not knowing that I was also taking advanced chemistry and maintaining a 3.8 GPA and sacrificing everything I had for a chance at something better. I told them about the professor whose house I cleaned who once saw me in class and didn't recognize me, because people like me are invisible until we're inconvenient. I told them about eating ramen noodles for 3 weeks straight because textbooks cost more than I had budgeted for, about the constant exhaustion that makes your bones ache and your brain feel like it's moving through molasses, about the guilt of wanting something better when your family is still struggling and you can't help them, because you're barely surviving yourself. Have you ever felt completely invisible and totally exposed at the same time? The crowd around me had grown, people recording on their phones, some with tears in their eyes, others nodding with understanding, and I realized that I wasn't alone in this experience, that there were other people in this store, in this city, in this world, who understood exactly what I was talking about because they had lived it too. They had felt the same shame, the same anger, the same desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. The sales associate was crying now, and part of me felt sorry for her. But a larger part of me was tired of making myself small to accommodate other people's comfort, tired of apologizing for my existence, tired of being treated like a problem instead of a person, and I kept talking. I told them about the invisible labor that poor people perform every single day just to survive, the mental calculations about whether you can afford to buy the cheaper shoes that will fall apart in 2 months or save up for the more expensive ones that will last longer, but require going hungry now. The constant stress of living one unexpected expense away from homelessness, the way poverty seeps into every corner of your life until you can't remember what it felt like to just exist without fear. I talked about the judgment, the constant, relentless judgment from people who had never missed a meal or worried about keeping a roof over their heads, people who thought poverty was a moral failing rather than a systemic problem, people who believed that anyone could pull themselves up by their bootstraps without acknowledging that some people can't even afford boots. And I asked the crowd, I asked everyone watching, do you know what it's like to be judged for something you didn't choose? To be treated like you're less than human because you don't have money? To work harder than anyone you know and still barely survive? And I could see heads nodding, could hear murmurs of agreement, could feel the energy shifting from uncomfortable witnessing to collective understanding. A manager appeared, flustered and apologetic, offering me the journal for free, offering me a gift card, offering me everything except what I actually wanted, which was simple dignity, basic respect, the acknowledgement that I was a paying customer who deserved to be treated like a human being. And I told him, I don't want your charity. I came here to buy this journal with money I earned, money I saved, money that represents 3 months of sacrifice, and I'm going to pay for it like any other customer because my money is just as good as anyone else's, even if it comes from different sources and required more sacrifice to obtain. And I walked to the register with my head held high, feeling the eyes of everyone in the store following me, and I paid my $68 and watched as they wrapped it in tissue paper and put it in a nice bag with handles, and it felt like the smallest victory and the most important battle all at once. But the story doesn't end there, because someone in that crowd posted the video online, and within hours it had thousands of views, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands, and suddenly people from all over were sharing their own stories of being judged for their poverty, of being treated as less than because they didn't have money, of struggling in silence because society tells us that poverty is shameful, and we should hide it rather than confront the systems that create and perpetuate it. And I started receiving messages from people I had never met, people who said they saw themselves in my story, people who thanked me for speaking up, for refusing to be silent, for demanding dignity in a world that tries to strip it away from anyone who doesn't fit the mold of acceptable, respectable, worthy. The video caught the attention of a local news station, and they wanted to interview me, wanted to know more about my story, about my struggles, about what it was really like to be young and poor and fighting for an education in a system that seemed designed to keep people like me in our place. And I said yes because I realized that this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every person who had ever been made to feel small, every parent working multiple jobs and still unable to provide everything their children needed, every student choosing between buying textbooks and eating, every human being whose worth was measured by the balance in their bank account rather than the content of their character. I went on that news program and I talked about the reality of poverty in America, about how it's not a lack of effort or ambition, but a lack of opportunity, a lack of support, a lack of systemic change that would allow people to actually climb out of the holes they were born into. And I talked about my mother, who worked harder than anyone I knew and still lived paycheck to paycheck, about my siblings, who deserved better than the hand they were dealt, about the millions of people grinding themselves to dust just to survive while others judged them for not achieving more. And something incredible happened. People started listening. Organizations reached out offering scholarships, offering support, offering resources that I didn't even know existed. And while part of me was grateful, another part was angry that these resources only became available after my pain went viral, after my struggle became entertainment, after I had to bare my soul to the world just to be seen as worthy of help. But I took what was offered because pride doesn't pay bills, and martyrdom doesn't feed families. And I started to build something that looked almost like stability, like maybe I could breathe without the constant pressure of impending disaster crushing my chest. I graduated from community college with honors and transferred to a 4-year university on a full scholarship. And I kept working, kept grinding, kept pushing forward, because that's what poor people do. We don't get the luxury of taking breaks or having safety nets or making mistakes that don't have catastrophic consequences, but now I had something I didn't have before. A voice, a platform, a way to tell our stories and demand better. Not just for me, but for everyone still fighting battles that most people never see. I started a blog documenting my experience, writing about the invisible struggles of poverty, the mental health toll of constant stress, the way classism intersects with every other form of oppression to create systems that keep people trapped in cycles they didn't create and can't escape alone, and people read it. Thousands of people, tens of thousands, and they shared their own stories in the comments, creating a community of people who understood, who had been there, who refused to be ashamed anymore of circumstances beyond their control. That department store where it all started reached out with a formal apology and wanted to feature me in a campaign about diversity and inclusion. And I almost laughed at the irony because what they were calling diversity was just not actively discriminating against poor people. What they were calling inclusion was just basic human decency. But I used the platform anyway. I worked with them to train their staff about unconscious bias, about the assumptions we make based on appearance, about treating every human being with dignity regardless of what they're wearing or how much money they appear to have. And it felt like a small step towards something bigger, something better. I went back to that store a year later, the same store where I had been humiliated and judged, but this time I was invited. This time they knew who I was, and I stood in front of their staff during a training session, and I told them my story again, not for sympathy, but for education, not to shame, but to enlighten. And I could see the recognition in some of their eyes, the understanding dawning that their actions have consequences, that their assumptions cause real harm to real people, that poverty is not a crime and poor people are not threats, but human beings deserving of respect. The sales associate who had confronted me that day was there, and afterwards she approached me with tears streaming down her face, and she apologized. Truly apologized, not with the corporate emptiness of damage control, but with genuine remorse. And she told me that she had grown up poor too, that she had forgotten what it felt like, that she had bought into the same classist narrative that she had once been victimized by. And I understood then that this system is designed to turn us against each other, to make us forget our own struggles once we climb even one rung up the ladder, to convince us that we're only valuable if we distance ourselves from where we came from. And I forgave her, because holding on to anger would only poison me. But I also told her that forgiveness doesn't erase impact, that she needed to do better, be better, use her position to protect people rather than persecute them. My little sister is 17 now, and she still has that journal, filled cover to cover with her thoughts, her dreams, her plans for a future that looks different from our past. And she's applying to colleges with scholarships I helped her find, with recommendations I helped her write, with a confidence I never had at her age because she's seen that it's possible to fight back, to demand better, to refuse to accept that poverty is destiny, and watching her grow into someone who knows her worth. Regardless of what's in her wallet is worth every sacrifice I made, every sleepless night, every moment of humiliation and struggle. I still work too hard, still worry about money, still feel that old anxiety creep up sometimes when I'm in places that feel too fancy, too expensive, too far from where I started. But I also know now that I belong anywhere I choose to be, that my worth is not determined by my bank account or my clothes or the assumptions strangers make about me. That poverty is not a moral failing, but a systemic injustice that we all have a responsibility to address. So here's what I want you to understand. Here's the message I need you to hear. If you've ever been judged for being poor, if you've ever felt invisible or less than, if you've ever been treated like you don't belong somewhere because you don't look the part, I see you, I understand, and your struggle is valid, your pain is real, and you deserve better. And if you've never experienced poverty, if you've never had to choose between eating and paying bills, if you've never felt the crushing weight of being judged for circumstances beyond your control, I need you to check your assumptions, question your biases, treat every person you encounter with dignity, because you have no idea what battles they're fighting, what sacrifices they're making, what strength it takes just to show up and keep trying in a world that constantly tells them they're not enough. This isn't just my story. This is our story, the story of millions of people who are struggling right now, who are working multiple jobs and still can't make ends meet, who are fighting for education and opportunity in systems that were never designed for them, who are being judged and dismissed and dehumanized every single day just for being poor, and we need to do better. We need to demand better. We need to create a world where everyone has access to basic dignity and opportunity, regardless of where they started or what they look like or how much money they have. That moment in the department store broke something in me, but it also built something stronger. It showed me that silence is complicity, that speaking up matters, that one voice can start a conversation that changes lives, and I refuse to be quiet anymore. I refuse to make myself small. I refuse to accept that this is just how things are because things can change. They must change. And it starts with each of us deciding that every human being deserves respect, deserves opportunity, deserves to exist in this world without shame or judgment or the constant fear that comes from living on the edge of survival. So I'm asking you, right now, have you ever judged someone based on their appearance? Have you ever made assumptions about someone's worth based on superficial markers of wealth or poverty? Have you ever contributed to a system that dehumanizes people for being poor? And more importantly, what are you going to do differently now? I want you to comment below and share your own experiences with judgment, with poverty, with fighting to be seen and heard in a world that tries to make you invisible. Because your story matters, your voice matters, you matter. And together we can create change that goes beyond viral videos and news interviews. Change that transforms systems and opens doors and ensures that no one else has to fight as hard as we did just to be treated like a human being. If this story touched something in you, if you felt the weight of these words in your chest, if you understand what it's like to be judged unfairly, or if you want to be part of creating a more just world, please hit that like button. It helps this message reach more people who need to hear it. People who are still fighting in silence, still struggling alone, still believing they're the only ones who feel this way. Subscribe to Through My Eyes for more real stories about real struggles, about the human experience and all its messy, complicated, beautiful difficulty, because we share these stories not for pity, but for understanding, not for charity, but for justice, not to make you feel bad, but to inspire you to be better, do better, create better. And make sure you turn on notifications because every story we share here matters. Every voice deserves to be heard. Every experience has value regardless of whether it comes wrapped in designer clothes or worn-out jeans. This is not just about poverty. This is about humanity, about recognizing that we all deserve dignity, we all deserve respect, we all deserve the chance to exist in this world without being judged for circumstances we didn't choose. And I believe that change is possible. I've seen it happen. I've lived it. And I know that when we come together, when we share our stories, when we demand better from ourselves and from the systems we live in, transformation becomes not just possible, but inevitable. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. Thank you for being here. And remember, you are worthy. You are valuable. You are enough, exactly as you are. And don't let anyone make you forget that.